Okay, folks, I got a special one for you here today. This is a friend of mine, Wes Garmer. I was on his show, and he decided he wanted to come over for the very first time and the only time that I know of that he came to YouTube, especially to a live stream, to do an interview with me and Lakea. It's got a lot of interesting stuff. I think you will like it. It's got a lot of his own points of views, mine, and we talk especially about the siege of Hanabi. I think I pronounced that right. Probably not. But anyway, here we go, y'all. Y'all enjoy. This is a re-upload from the old channel, but I figured there would be a lot of people here that didn't get to hear that, didn't even know about it. Wes Garmer from Sasquatch Chronicles.
Good evening, everyone. This is your Vault Keeper here. We have a special guest with us tonight, Mr. West from Sasquatch Chronicles. How you doing, Mr. West?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on tonight.
That's no problem. Folks, the way we're going to do this tonight is if you have a question for Mr. West, we're going to let him talk. He's got a few stories and stuff to tell us, and we're just going to talk amongst ourselves for a little bit. And be asking your questions in the chat. Lakea is going to be writing them down, and then when we get ready, she's going to start asking Mr. West your questions. And if he wants to answer, he answers. If not, we're going to move on to the next one. So, man, I appreciate you having me on your show last night. Everybody, Mr. West was gracious enough to let me do a show with episode with him last night on his show. When will that be coming out?
That particular one will probably come out Sunday. And I was honored to have you on. I had a lot of fun even after the mics were off, us talking. And for the audience, forgive me, I'm kind of fighting a chest cold. So forgive me if you hear me coughing or anything like that. And I apologize to you guys, but thank you for having me on. I'm happy to come on, and I'm pleased to be here. So thank you.
Oh, yes, sir. I think this is your first, especially the first live YouTube show, but the first YouTube show you've been on, isn't it?
Yeah, it is the first YouTube show I've been on. I've been offered several times, and just because I get so busy with my own show, I don't have time to generally go and do a whole lot of those shows. So generally speaking, I don't do a whole lot, but hey, man, I'm happy to be here. Hopefully you'll have me back. I might get used to this.
Oh, yes, sir. Most definitely. Anytime you want to come back, all you got to do is just ask. I was going to let you tell a couple of stories of what you wanted to tell people. I like the one we were talking about last night, the one off the air. I don't know how much of that you want to talk or tell.
Yeah, I mean, you tell me. Where would you like me to start?
Well, but you're the first one that I don't know how to go about this. How much of the story can you tell about what the lady told you about where their heart is?
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, so for the audience, I had this person on the show, and I can go over the story if you want.
Okay.
I had this person on the show. They sent me all their military credentials, and some of the stuff, some of the documents I got didn't really make sense. But it was a female that sent it to me, and she had knowledge of these things. She talked about, there's all kinds of stories with her, but one of the things you asked about the heart placement, she said that their heart, I guess let me back up. She is a geneticist. So she used to do a lot of stuff with the DNA. So she knew a lot about these creatures, and she was embedded with these kill teams, was the story she was telling me. She was embedded with these kill teams that would go out and kill different groups of these things for different reasons. And there was more than just her. There were scientists, there was biologists that were embedded in these kill teams, and they'd go out to these places and dispose of these creatures. But one of the things that she was talking to me about, is the chest, the way their chest structure is set up, and the way the bone density of their chest, is so thick that a lot of times if you shoot them, especially in that range from the chest, the mid tarsal, if you shoot them in that area, generally you're not going to kill them. And the reason why is most bullets won't penetrate that chest plate. And she said the heart the heart of the creatures isn't center chest or kind of off to one side or, like ours. It's actually closer to underneath the armpit is actually where the heart's at. But yeah, where would you like me to start with that whole thing?
That's great, because I don't think anyone else has heard that except for you and the listeners to get to hear that show before you took it down. Because I've always wondered about that, because several people have told me, well, Bolt, I shot this thing dead on, square in the chest, and it acted like it didn't even phase it. It just, matter of fact, it sped up. And that always got me. It's like, well, that should have been a heart shot, or at least it should have been close enough to the heart to cause, stress from the round hitting it from the shock wave. But if the heart is further, say 6 to 8 inches, well, in this case, it could be a foot over on some of these animals. All it's doing is actually hitting a void if it does penetrate. But it sounds like, it's going to take a pretty substantial round to even get penetration, even at close distance.
Yeah, and that's basically what she told me. I mean, she even said, was like a 357 won't penetrate their skulls. So a lot of handguns, people, even if they try a headshot, you're not going to penetrate the skull of one of these things. But she went into all the different types, and the military supposedly has a number and lettering system for each one. Like one type might be like M134. She was an interesting lady to talk to, though, because I knew right off the bat she was military. You can always tell when you're talking to someone who's either been in the military or around the military, because they speak a different lingo, they speak a different, and right off the bat I could tell you that she was military. But she had a lot of interesting things to say about the different types and how they're genetically altering some. And she went into the story about how she was actually attacked by one. She was up in the mountains, in a cabin, and she was monitoring a group. This is a story she relayed to me. She was monitoring a group up there, and one of these creatures had come down, and her dog went after it. Well, when she stepped outside, the creature actually had the dog in its hands, and she thought it was going to rip the dog apart. And she ended up just reacting, pulled out her pistol and started firing, and hit this thing several times at point blank range. Didn't kill it. It dropped the dog. It picked her up and slammed her on the ground, and then started to beat her like a piece of meat, like you would tenderize meat. And there wasn't much left of her when the creature was done. Why it didn't kill her, I don't know. And I think even the military was surprised it didn't kill her. But she had sent me some photos after, she calls it the accident. She looked like she got hit by a train, is what she looked like. The doctor said she'd never walk again, she'd never talk again, and she's defied all of that. She can walk and talk, but you can tell it's someone who's had a traumatic brain injury, because sometimes she gets way off topic when you're talking to her, but you can reel her back in. But she knows her stuff, especially when she talks about these creatures and Dogman and different genetic manipulations that are going on. It was interesting and terrifying all in the same breath to talk with her. And I didn't get a chance to go back and listen to my recording before this interview, so I apologize to you. But I ended up taking it down because there was a couple attempts on her life, and she asked me if I would take it down, which I did. A show's never worth hurting someone that much. I'm not too concerned with ratings or downloads, or especially when it comes to that. If someone's truly trying to kill this woman, then that's why I took the show down. I had a 3-part show with her, about 4 hours of recording, and I only released about 45 minutes of it, and I took the rest down.
That's what I like about you, Wes. You are actually about the guest and the people and helping and getting stuff out there. It's not all about the money or the fame or anything that's attached to this. That's what I liked about your show, and like I said, I've been listening, and that's going to bring me to my next thing with you. I did not realize until I was doing some research, and like I said, going back listening to your shows, that you actually had a guest on your show that was attacked by a couple of Squatches, and he honestly thought they intended on grabbing him and eating him. That is very, very close to Property X, y'all.
Which episode was that?
I cannot remember which episode that was for nothing. I tried to go back and find it today, and I could not find the number of the episode, but it's where the man got pulled from the van. But like I said, you were telling me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Tracy. Yeah, he's actually very close to Property X. And he ended up, and this wasn't the only, it's when I was doing a live show, he was a call-in. And I didn't like that quite as much because it's hard to, well, anyway, I can come back to that. But anyway, I brought him in and he started telling the story, and I felt so bad for the guy because you could hear he was in tears on the air. And I didn't really know what to do. I was like, well, should I mute this? Should I take him off? You know, because the guy really got physically upset when he's recounting the story. But what happened with Tracy, and again, he's very close to Property X. His van broke down. He was having troubles. I think it was overheating, if my memory's right. Something was wrong. It would still run, but he pulled over because he was having mechanical problems. Well, when he got out of his van, he went to go pee. And he jumped out of the van, and he was standing right next to the van. He starts peeing. Well, he looks up, and he's almost peeing on one of these creatures. It's looking right at him. And he kind of falls backwards. And as he's getting back up to his feet, he looks behind that creature, and there's 3 other ones standing behind it. And the way he described that creature is interesting. If you've ever seen the photo of Them and Us by Danny Vendermini, that is basically what he said he saw. He said it had more of a reddish eye to it, more of a reddish tinge. It wasn't glowing red eyes, but they were kind of a reddish tinge. And he said it had a human nose. And for your audience, the Danny Vendermini, what he was doing is a recreation of a Neanderthal. But he said they didn't look human. They looked more like what we would call a Sasquatch, is basically the theory he's going off of. And so he gets out, he stops peeing, he jumps back in the van, and he ends up taking off. And he thought for sure the creatures were going to kill him. And this guy was shook up for a long, long time. But no, I've had a lot of very aggressive encounters. I mean, I had an ambulance medic where their ambulance was attacked down in Texas. They had a flat tire, and what happened with those guys is they were transporting someone back from the hospital back to their home. And this guy's been a medic. The guy in charge, there's basically a driver, and then there's the guy that's the actual medic. Well, he's been a medic for, I know medic's not the right term, but you guys know what I mean. He's been in that position for over, I think, 20 years. And him and his driver, after they dropped the guy off, and he said they dropped him off in the middle of nowhere. As they're coming back, they get a flat tire. And so they pull over to change the tire out. And what's interesting is when they get out to change the tire out, he said, immediately I felt like I was being watched. But I didn't believe in Bigfoot. And, I just brushed it off as nothing. I didn't pay attention to that feeling. And he goes, we get out and start trying to get the back end up on a jack to swap the tire out. And I think they started getting stuff thrown at them from the edge of the wood line. And one of the creatures, they could see people, they thought it was people running around in the forest, kind of surrounding that van on the edge of the road. So both the guys get back up in the ambulance, and probably most of the listeners know this story better than I do, but it's been that long ago. They get back in the van, and they're getting on the radio saying someone's out here messing with us. And his partner's shaking. His partner later told him he heard a growl or something to that effect. And so they're sitting in the cab of the ambulance, and the driver for the ambulance company, he was brand new. He had just started, I think, within 4 to 6 months, so he was practically brand new. And he got so nervous that he flipped the lights and siren on, the emergency lights. He was trying to turn on the radio. He's trying to do something. He was shaking, and he accidentally turned on the emergency lights. Well, when the emergency lights come on, it actually lights up the whole forest around them. And he said what stood out was about an 8-foot tall chimpanzee, half chimp, half man. And it grabbed a branch and threw it at the truck. And they were trying to figure out how to turn they were fighting over who's going to turn off the lights, and they're just freaking out on what they're seeing. And this thing actually charged the ambulance and hit the box of the ambulance. Hit it so hard, he thought it was going to knock it over. But it hit the side of the van so hard, it messed up all their electrical in the van. And so they get on the phone, they're calling the cops, they're begging anyone and everyone to come out. And they're saying they're getting attacked by monkeys. He doesn't know what it is. The police, by the time the police get out there and his supervisor gets out there, they're asking him, well, what happened? And so he pulls the supervisor off to the side, and the driver can barely talk. He's in tears, barely unconsolable over what just happened. So the medic pulls the supervisor to the side and tells him exactly what happened. And the supervisor tells him, you guys hit a bear. He's like, there's no bears out here. We didn't hit a bear. This thing charged the side of and he's like, listen, you hit a bear. And so he made him write it up that they hit a bear, supposedly for the insurance. But to this day, he goes, Wes, I didn't hit a bear. This wasn't a bear that we hit. He goes, it looked like an overgrown chimpanzee, and this thing wanted to kill me. I thought it was going to kill us. And he goes, a whole group of them in there. But the main one that stood out was that 8-foot tall, what he describes as chimpanzee.
And it's amazing. I've heard that several times too, Wes, where like law enforcement, EMTs, any kind, like first responders, they get to a scene or it involves them. You have this supervisor comes out. It's anything but what you said it was, because no one wants to be the person, I guess, that says Bigfoot attacked my ambulance. Can you please insurance pay off?
Yeah.
I just, and that to me aggravates me to no end, because it's like it's just one more cover up. And I'm about like you with the cover ups. I'm so sick of them, because it's just as easy to go ahead and put these out there and let the mass people know, and it would probably stop a lot of the more violent interactions, because normally, like I said, you're like me, I believe. All of them are not, every time you meet one, they're not out to kill you most of the time. Now, you do have some rogues. You have some just with a bad personality, and you don't know what the person that done before you done to this creature. So now how's it going to react to you? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception of me out there where everyone might, or maybe there's not, but I've been told this a lot in the past, where, everyone thinks I think that they're godless killing machines, and I don't believe that. I think that they can be very dangerous. I think what people call habituation, I think, is very dangerous behavior. I think that if you come across one and he's in a particular bad mood, you're going to be in trouble. But do I think if you just come across one, will they slaughter you just to slaughter you? I don't believe that. And I think that there probably is ones that are more gentle out there, that mainly are just observing, like a chimpanzee or like a great ape. They will observe you. But do they really want to interact with you? Not really, but they're curious. So they'll come in and check you out. I've had so many witnesses where they see these creatures, the creature notices them noticing it, and it gets up and walks away. There's no confrontation. There's no nothing. It just gets up and walks away. And I think that's probably how most encounters go. I think where you run into problems is if when you interrupt a hunt or something that they're doing, I think that they have very short tempers. And I think that you could be on the receiving end really fast with these things. But like anything else, if you come across a cougar, is it going to automatically kill you in the woods? Probably not. It's probably going to leave. If you push it, you're going to be on the receiving end of its anger. And I think it goes with anything else, just like Sasquatch.
I believe that too. And I don't know what you're feeling. I believe these creatures can be emotional too. That's one thing that I don't hear a whole lot of people talk about. And the reason why I say that is because I've got a couple reports where, like, elderly people, at one time or another, I don't know if they've done it. They were habituating uh, encounters. I don't know if they were doing it because they were lonely and didn't have nobody else, or it was just their repetitious, of what they did every day. Like, they carried their breakfast food. They put everything in one pot. And at the end of the day, they carried it out, dumped it out. Well, there was this one family that got a hold of me that just swore up and down these things were gonna, if whoever stayed in the house after this woman had died, they were just gonna kill them, because the night that she died, the family come over and stuff like that. Well, there was a report of two of these things standing back off up on a hillside, wailing and moaning, like they were just upset because this lady had died.
Yeah, and that wouldn't shock me a whole lot. You'll see like on Facebook where I've seen many videos where people die and their dogs go into major depression. There's a famous picture of a dog at a gravesite that lays down. The new owner walks him over. That his old owner passed away. He had the dog for I think 15 years, and this German Shepherd kind of moans and whines, and it lays right on the gravesite of where they buried this guy. And so there is a lot of humanity in animals, despite what most people think. I think that there is a lot of humanity with these things. There was a time I was in Washington State, and I've talked about this previously on past shows, but I was at the Browns property. It's this couple that, super nice people. They had these creatures on their property. And I became convinced they had these things on their property. They had a great thermal footage. But beyond that, Sarah had recorded hours and hours and hours and hours of these things. Stuff that was pretty comparable to like Ron Moorhead's Sierra sounds. She had recorded all sorts of vocalizations. I was on the property one time and I heard Yahoo. I heard one of these things yell out Yahoo. It sounded like a deaf monkey saying Yahoo. But we would hear them chatter out there. You would hear, all kinds of signs on this property. They were there. But what was interesting is Sarah had come up with this trash bag tent that she had set up. It was all trash bags. It was this huge tent. And the reason for that is when you take your thermal in there, it's almost like you're not inside of a tent. You can see everything. It looks right past that trash bag like it's not there. And I was in there sitting, it was myself, Shannon, and Sarah sitting out there one night. And I said, I'm going to try this baby crying. Just see what happens. Because I knew that these things were around the property. So I go out there and I'd set up on my YouTube. You can look up baby crying, and you can get why in God's name you'd want to listen to 10 hours of a baby crying. Is beyond me, but you can. And so I connected it to a speaker, and I started blasting that, a baby crying. And then I go back and I sit down. Well, after about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, I had enough. It was honestly driving me insane. It was like that's how they should torture the prisoners of war and put them in a room with that sound just playing. That's, I'd rather be waterboarded than sit and listen to that. But But anyway, so I start playing it. So I get up to the point where I'm burnt out on listening to it. Then I'm telling the girls, I got to go turn this off. It's cutting through me like a knife. And as I walk into the tent, right as I'm about to hit off, it sounded like a huge Mack truck was coming my way from the forest. You could hear this thing knocking over everything in its way, coming right in my direction. Now, in Washington State, we have cougars and we have black bears. The black bears out here aren't very big. They're actually really small, and they're not really aggressive. Here in this Pacific Northwest where I'm at, they're not really aggressive at all. If they see or hear you, they're going to run from you. But this thing was coming, and you could hear it just coming. And so I didn't turn the sound off. I sat and listened for a second. I'm trying to scan with the thermal, and it was on the backside. They had like a shed back there. And right where it was coming, it was kind of almost to the corner of that shed, and there's the edge of the wood line. And this thing started cooing. It was the craziest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Like what you'd hear a mother coo to her child. It was the crazy. I mean, I hadn't heard anything like that online. Never heard of vocalization. This thing started cooing, and it was cooing towards that sound tent where I was at. And it sat there and cooed and cooed and cooed. And I ended up turning the sound off. And almost immediately when I turned the sound off, it stopped. And I didn't hear it leave. That's the other interesting part. Is I heard it coming. And it was knocking over everything, but I never heard it leave. And do I think it was a Sasquatch? I do. Did I see a Sasquatch cooing? I didn't. But that's what I think it was going on. But that was the first time where I really thought there's a humanity to these things. They're not the monsters that most people think. Do I think they're monsters most of the time? Absolutely. But I think there is a small amount of some humanity in them. But again, that varies from creature to creature.
I'm with you. I think it depends on how the interactions have been with the person that's right there at that time. I believe it depends on how that person reacts. There's so many factors that can go into making an encounter be just like some people say, he just looked at me and walked away. Then you got some that say this thing looked like it wanted to rip my head off.
Yeah.
I believe it firmly depends on what kind of interactions they've had before with humans or how that human reacts then.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, in my opinion, and again, I could be wrong. I know there's a huge debate that these things are people, and I disagree with that. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with a wild animal, a very intelligent wild animal. The same way an ape or any other non-human primate, they're very curious, but they generally, a true wild non-human primate, you get too close to one and they're going to rip your arm off and beat you with it. And that's how most, I know everyone sees the image of a chimpanzee on TV and they're trained to dance around and they got little costumes and we have them in the circus. You run into a chimpanzee in the wild, you better turn around and go the other way because they're one of the most vicious non-human primates on the planet. They will kill you and they will eat you. But having said that, does that mean every time you run into something like that, that's going to happen? Probably not. But you still have to take that caution when you run into these things, that you're not going to walk up and start petting it on the head. It probably will kill you at that point if you try and do that.
Oh, I firmly believe that too. I relate to people when they say, well, I want to go out and find especially when they say they want to go out and find a dog, man, which I don't understand that. But
yeah.
I relate it to, okay, I'm going to take you to Alaska, and I'm going to find you a grizzly bear. Now, do you think you're going to be able to walk out to that grizzly bear, have a friendly encounter, and both of y'all walk away? It ain't going to happen.
Right.
But, it's a wild animal, especially these Bigfoots and these people. Sometimes I don't understand what people are thinking. That's like when I try not to discourage anyone, from, if they want to go out looking for them, I try not to discourage them. What I tell them is before you go out to wherever you're going, learn as much as you can about the property. Sit down, do a whole bunch of research. See if there's any sightings. See if anybody's had any encounters. See how the encounters went. If they were benign, if they were aggressive, or they just didn't like people being around. Do your research, then go.
Yeah, I agree. And most encounters, I know everyone thinks I cherry pick and just take the most violent type encounters, and that's not really true. I have had a lot of roadside crossings where hunters have seen them, they've seen that, they see each other, and they turn and go the opposite direction. What I can tell you from talking to a lot of witnesses is most encounters are not happy, friendly encounters. They're just not. There's usually aggravation. There's usually contention. The person's terrified. I think the creature's terrified, and you better make sure you make the right move on what you're doing and how you act and react in certain situations, because you can be killed very easily. But yeah, no, you're right on the grizzly bear. I always tell people, treat it like you ran into a grizzly bear. You're not going to turn around and run. You can't outrun a grizzly bear.
Nope.
You're not going to climb anything. You can't outclimb a grizzly bear. You sure can't outswim one. But if you slowly back off, most of the time, Mother Nature will back off.
Yeah, pretty much. That's like if a grizzly bear charges, you don't want to run. Most times if you stand near your ground, they do bluff charges too. They 90% of the time it's just because they're scared and they want you to leave. The only time that I've seen grizzly bear or black bear come at humans, I was telling this story. I went on a bear hunt up in Colorado, and no, it wasn't a bear hunt. My fault. I'm sorry. It was a deer hunt, and the guy told us it wound up turning into a bear hunt. The guy told us, look, when we shoot a deer, you've got to hurry up, find that deer and get it gutted. We need to get it out of here. I'm like, is this a race or what? He said, no, these bear up here have learned when they hear a gunshot, 90% of the time that means a dinner bell. All they've got to do is go to that deer, and the hunters usually will back off and they'll let them have it. Well, a couple of hunters killed a really nice mule deer. I think it was up there. It might have been a whitetail, but I think it was a mule deer. And they just didn't want to give it up. And it wound up, one guy got mauled pretty good, and the other guy wound up having to shoot the bear and kill the bear. So, a bear lost its life. A guy almost lost his life over a deer.
Yeah.
People just sometimes don't react like they should. It's sad when animals, like I said, I'm a hunter. I tell a lot of people that. But I don't hunt for sport. I hunt to feed. I eat everything that I kill. If I can't eat it, I don't kill it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, and I think most hunters are that way. At least most of the ones I've met that are that way. But with regard to them taking the deer, I kind of think the same thing with the Sasquatch. And I've talked to hunters who've had private property, and the minute they start firing off shots, they'll go to where the deer is supposed to be, all the blood sitting there, and the deer's gone. So I think Sasquatch does that same thing that the grizzly bear does. And I know down towards Yellowstone, they were having the same problem with hunters out there. Every time they'd fire off the shot, the grizzly bear really wasn't interested in the hunter. It wasn't interested in what the hunter was killing. But in those situations, there's a guy up where here in Washington State, he's a poacher, and I've talked about this on past shows. But and he eats the meat, so I guess as long as he's not killing just to kill. I mean, he's doesn't. It's not legal, but I don't really have a problem with this guy because he's eating the meat. But that's neither here nor there. He was up, and I know exactly where he was at, and he had shot a buck up there. Well, and when he went in to get his buck, he said an ape was carrying off his buck. And I said, what do you mean was carrying off your buck? And he goes, it had it over its shoulders. It looked back at me. I looked at it, and it just turned and walked off with my buck over its shoulder. And the bucks out here, I mean, you're talking about small horses out here. For this thing to pick it up and throw it over its shoulder is pretty amazing.
Well, I've told people they don't realize how strong these things are. I've got an encounter where it actually turned pretty bad, where they had been having one of these creatures come up at night. I think they had been habituating a encounter to start with by throwing out scraps and stuff. Well, they stopped because something kept tearing up the garbage, getting into the sheds, getting into the outhouses. Well, they stopped doing that. So these things come up, start slapping the house. They had shot at him a couple of times. Well, I think he actually hit one. And from what they told me is when the man hit this one, he was shooting a shotgun. He hit him, and he fell down, and then 2 more came over, picked him up, got him back on his feet, and they took off. Well, he thought the whole encounter thing was gone. Well, I've done hurt one, and it's over with. They won't be back. Later that night, their bed was in between 2 windows in the back of the house, where the bottom of the windowsill was about 10 feet off the ground. One of these things reached up, grabbed the windowsill, and ripped that whole wall out to get into them. I tell people, if they want in your house, they can get in your house. And sometimes shooting, just firing a gun sometimes will scare them off, but it can also make them even madder. And if you hit one, it's not the one usually you hit you've got to worry about. Usually if there's one, there's others. I've only had a few encounters where it was just one solitary creature. Most of the time, if you stay still and wait just a few seconds, you'll hear movement off to your side, or there'll be another one behind it. I've even had some come in behind me. And I've walked right by some of these creatures and not even know that I walked by them. I don't know if you've got any stories like that. I've got one where I told this one before. I was actually hunting myself up north, and it had just stopped. In certain states, you can only use a bow, and then they open up a shotgun season. There is no high-powered rifle. Well, they had just closed bow season down and opened up rifle season. Well, the guy that I was hunting on his land, he told me, he said, well, if you go up this road right here, it'll Y. And you'll see a couple little bushes. He said, if you'll stay to keep those bushes on your right-hand side for just for so many feet, and then look off to your right, you'll see a stand out there. Go climb up my stand, and everything's ready. Well, I do exactly what he tells me. But as I'm walking down through there, I come by this big, what I thought at the time was about a 6-foot burnout stump. It looked like a tree, had been hit by lightning and just, burn out and been there forever. Well, I was thinking to myself, why didn't he just tell me? So right across from where that stump was a stand. I was thinking, why didn't he just tell me go to the burnout stump and the stand's right across from it? Well, I go and get in my stand, and I'm getting everything ready, and I've gotten settled, and it's just gotten light enough where, you can make out shapes and see stuff from a distance. Well, I'm sitting there, and I'm waiting, and all of a sudden that stump that I just walked by, I'm talking about, was probably 15 yards away from it, gets up and walks away.
Yeah. I have heard a lot of encounters like that. There's one, a lot of hunters run into these things. It's not comparable to the one you just told, but I found that it was interesting. I had a hunter on the show one time, and this is the first time I'd ever heard something like this. He was out on this property. I'm trying to remember what state this was. I want to say it was Midwest. It might have been more of the East Coast, but anyway, he was out on this property, and this is probably 200 episodes ago. And he goes out there to hunt. Now, when he goes out, he sits in this one area and he's overlooking everything. So if any direction, no matter what animal comes, it'll be hard for them to pick up the scent of him based on his location. And so he was sitting there right before the sun came up, and the sun was finally up. It was probably mid-morning. He was getting ready to pack up and leave. And what he first thinks is he thinks he sees a bear coming out of the brush. But what threw him off is it was on 2 legs. And that really shocked him to see this thing up walking around on 2 legs. So he puts a scope to it and really zooms in on this thing. And he said it reminded him of a half man, half monkey that had Down syndrome, is how he described it. And he said it had very much a human-shaped nose, just flatter, and the eyes were kind of in the back of the head, but he said it was walking around like a man. And he said what was interesting was it wasn't using its right arm. Almost like when you see someone who's had a stroke, they'll lose mobility on one side. And he said it just kind of, its right arm just kind of hung down. And he said it reached down, picked up a rock, and started hitting a tree with it. And then it put its ear up against a tree. Then he's watching this whole thing through his scope the whole time. And he said it just fascinated him. He'd never seen anything like that before, but it would tap a couple times on the tree. And he said, you know what? It reminded him of like finding Bigfoot when they do their wood knocking. He said it kind of sounded like that. It kind of sounded like what people call wood knocking, except for it wasn't a stick. It was a rock in its hand. So it taps, it keeps hitting the tree and then puts its ear up against it, hits the tree a couple more times, puts its ear up against it. And then with one arm, it knocks the tree over. And I guess it was a rotten tree, and a raccoon came out. And it grabbed that raccoon and smashed its head against another tree, and then sat down and proceeded to basically rip it open and eat the guts right there. But he does a great job at describing this thing. I mean, even from head to toe, he'll tell you every little detail about this thing. And he goes, I don't know if it got my scent or not, but when it was done, it got up, kind of looked around, and then went back into the tree line, and he left. And he doesn't hunt anymore. That was the last day he ever went hunting. But it just blew him away.
I've had a lot of hunters tell me that after they see the Sasquatch, especially a dog man, that's usually the last day. I've had hunters leave all their equipment to sneak because they were scared it would slow them down, especially after seeing a dog man, and just leave. And I'm talking about leave. You know, deer stands today are not that cheap, but say 10 years ago, they really wasn't cheap. You're talking about $300-400 just for a self-climbing deer stand. They just leave all of it in the woods, and they never went hunting again. That's funny because, like I said, that seemed like a repetitive thing. Like I said, when they see them and realize, hey, you're not the top predator out here, even though you have a gun, it changes their whole outlook.
Yeah, I think it throws a lot of people's what they perceive to be real or reality into a spiral when you realize that these things are out there. Going back to what you were saying earlier with the dog man, I had a kid on the show one time. Well, kid, I say kid, he's probably late 20s. But I had him on the show one time, and he was out on his grandfather's property, and he would go out and kill coyotes because they would attack the livestock, and they were having problems with coyotes. And so he'd go out and shoot them and try and get rid of the coyote problem they had. And he's out there one day with this rifle, and he thinks he sees, there's a bunch of brush, and then he thinks he sees a coyote head, and he thought the coyote was laying down. And so he takes a shot. And what was interesting is he missed. He hit the tree right above where this thing's head was. And the thing stood up and looked right at him. And he said it reminded him of a werewolf, like what you'd see in the movies. And it kind of ran off on two legs, but it didn't actually run off. It just got cover. And it watched this kid. The sad part about what happened afterwards is this is his grandfather's property. And so he runs home. Well, where do you think that dog man goes? It follows this kid home. And he said, the part that I thought the story was interesting is a lot of the behavior you hear from witnesses that talk about Sasquatch is the same behavior a lot of times with Dogman. He said that the rocks were getting thrown at the house. It would come bang up on the house. And it was always directed at his room, the room he slept in. He said about 2-3 o'clock in the morning, it'd step outside of his window and start growling at him. And this is still ongoing to this day. It hasn't hurt him yet, but he stays with his grandfather about once every 2 or 3 months. And it's just interesting that this thing followed him home. You know, I don't know if it's seeking revenge. I think it killed one of the horses after that. It didn't kill it to eat it, just killed it to kill it. But you hear these stories of these dogmen. I mean, I've had state patrolmen, a guy on the East Coast, call me not too long ago, and he almost hit one. And he said, "Hey, I can't come on the air because of my job, but this dogman's real. He's in his state patrol car heading out to a call out in the sticks because all the local police were busy, so they called him to go out to this. I think it was a domestic violence or something, some sort of disturbance. So he's heading out there. On his way out there, he said the largest wolf he had ever seen in his life comes walking down the hill right in the road. And he goes, I thought it was a wolf until it stood up. And it was right in front of my patrol car, about 4 or 5 feet. And he describes the head of a German Shepherd. He said the body reminded him more of a man, except for the back legs were very much canine-like. And it had hands and claws. And it showed its teeth and stood there and looked right at him. And he said it wasn't like looking into the eyes of a dog. He said there was something not right about this thing as it was looking at him. But it ends up running off, jumping over the side of the highway and running down this hill. And he said there's no way you could run down this hill. You would almost need climbing gear to get down this embankment that it ran down. But he said it ran down on 2 legs. He'd just never seen anything like that. It was about 6.5, 7 feet tall. I think he told me he thought it probably weighed anywhere between 300 to 500 pounds, probably closer to 3. And it just looked like a werewolf is how he describes it. And so it's interesting. I think more and more people are seeing this dog man, but I didn't mean to get off topic. I apologize.
Oh no! Look, dog man, Bigfoot. We talk about everything here, Wes. You never know what you're gonna find here, but like I said, the dog man thing is getting a lot more attention now because, like I said, I think it's because of people like you, Dark Waters, me now, actually talking and telling what people are actually seeing. Like I said, when I had my encounter, the first people that I contacted was the BRFO, and those people were not the friendliest and nicest people to deal with.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Like I said, it wasn't a good experience, but anyway, the one thing that, like I said, I know what I was going to ask you. Someone asked me not too long ago when they heard my story, Booger Valley. I don't know if you ever got to listen to it or not. They wanted to know if that was a recreation of Wanabe, Ranch, or I cannot remember the correct name.
Siege of Hanabiu?
Yes, Siege of Hanabe. And I was like, no, I didn't know what they were talking about, and I had to go actually look it up. And I didn't know that you had covered that.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's the one show everyone always talks about, and it blows my mind that show's even popular because I couldn't get the witnesses to come on the show. At the time, they didn't want anything to do with Bigfoot. Nice guys, nice brothers. They'd sit on the phone and tell you the information these guys had was pretty amazing. But they would, I probably talked to them for over 2 days, probably 3-4 hours a day, talked to them about what was going on that property. And I was very impressed with the guys. And you have to forgive me on some of the details. I think that was like episode 11. I think I'm getting close to 300 now. So it was a while back, but they had all sorts of problems on that property. These things were extremely aggressive with these brothers. They lived out in the middle of nowhere. And I think the first time it was 2 brothers and their dad, and they just owned a bunch of acreage right there. And so all 3 of them kind of lived on the land. They didn't live in the same home, but all of them kind of lived on the same land. And if my memory's right, I believe his younger brother was the first one that actually saw it. And he didn't tell his brother because he thought his brother would ridicule him over it. While his older brother ended up running into them and seeing them. So he starts telling his younger brother, and his younger brother's like, yeah, I've seen them too. And so they kind of get into an argument over it. But what happened on that property, these things just got really aggressive with these brothers. They would throw rocks at the house. They'd come up and growl at the house. He thought they were going to kill his dogs. They would mimic his dog. Well, I'll get to the mimicking in a second, but they were just running into all kinds of problems with these things to the point, I think his niece came over one night, starts getting out of the car to walk up to the home. And I think within 10 feet, there's like an 8.5-foot tall creature standing there showing its teeth, growling at her. So she goes running into the home. Well, that wasn't the only time it ever happened. Every time they came and went, they'd have rocks thrown at them. I mean, it was getting bad. They'd come up and bang on the house. They'd stand right at the back door and look in and start growling, or they'd come up to the windows and start growling at whoever was in that room. And so the brothers got fed up. I know, I think his wife and children ended up leaving and staying with family, and it was just him and his brother, and they had contacted the BFRO because they wanted these things to go away. Now, I don't want to bash everyone at the BFRO. I'm sure there's good people there.
Yeah.
But I know the people he had contacted weren't real helpful. The brothers, their question was, how do we get rid of these things? Well, the BFR was more interested in setting up a little research site on these guys' property, and that's not what they wanted. They didn't care what these things were. They just wanted them to go away. And so there was a lot of different problems, and you can read a lot of the communication and the emails back and forth on the BFRO's website. But what's interesting about the communication, you could tell the investigators there, they didn't really want to be there because things were so bad. And the brothers told me that two of the investigators left the first night they were there, just up and left. They were so terrified, they just left. And so the brothers ended up trying to kick these guys off their property, and they were begging to stay. And one night, the brothers were sitting in their living room, and these guys, as they described it, were armed to the teeth 24/7. They always had a gun on them. Even when they left and came to the property, they came armed every time. So they're sitting in their living room, and one of these creatures walks up to the back window and starts growling at the two brothers. And I think it was the younger brother. He just said, I had enough of this, and put a chamber in the round, went right for the window. The creature turns and jumps off the back porch, and the brother shot it, blew a hole in its back. And I can't remember what round he was using, but it dropped, and he hit it again. And it starts trying to crawl away from the back door. And what was interesting, when I talked to the brothers, they said, one of the brothers said to me, he goes, I heard this thing die. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he goes, I could hear it gurgling on its own blood. And we sat and we waited till this thing was dead. And then they were going to drag it back up to the house. And so they're waiting for this thing to die. It's gurgling on all its blood. And the brothers start, as soon as they think it's dead, they start approaching the body. And they say they were ambushed by about 5 or 6 of these creatures, came out of the wood line. And the backyard was kind of if memory is right, it's kind of a horseshoe. And on all sides of the horseshoe and in the front, so from the left and the right, and then in the front, these creatures stepped out, started growling and throwing things at the brothers. So they back off the body, and he said that one step forward, picked it up, threw it over its shoulder, and then went back off into the woods. And that was, from that point on, things got 100 times worse on that property. He thinks they were trying to lure him out into the woods. They would mimic his dog crying, he said, constantly, and his dog sitting at his feet, but he'd hear what sounded like his dog whining out in the woods, and then he'd see the creature get up and run off. There was another time his younger brother and his father were standing out near the driveway, and they heard what sounded like the older brother calling for the younger brother by his first name. And they kind of looked at each other, and they said, hasn't so-and-so left? Isn't he gone? And his car wasn't there. And I thought that part of the story was very, very fascinating, because the brothers said it sounded like a deaf person trying to mimic, and they couldn't figure out how they got the name. And the more the brothers talked, when they first bought the property, they would go out on the property, get firewood, they were exploring different areas, and they would call to each other. And that's the only way he figured out this thing was somewhat trying to mimic him calling for his brother. But he said it was off. It wasn't a perfect mimic. He said it was definitely off. It sounded more like a deaf person. But he said he watched these things for a long time. And he said they don't run down deer like people think. He said they'll stand on the edge of a game trail and wait for a creature to approach. Or one of the things he saw them do, he said one would stand at one end of the game trail, make some noise, try and flush the animal down the game trail where one was waiting to pounce. And so he learned really quick that they're more or less an ambush type creature. They don't run down deer like people think. They sit and wait and ambush. But he said that, the guy gave me so much. He almost shot one time. He had what's it called? A big dumpster on his property. And
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, those big commercial dumpsters. He had one of those on his property, and he was up towards a house, and he heard something in that dumpster digging around. And so he starts approaching the dumpster, and it stops. And he cocks the hammer back on his pistol, and this thing popped its head up and looked at him, and he said it kind of had this oh crap look on its face. Its eyes got real big. And he said it jumped out of that dumpster, took off running on two legs, and he's firing off shots at this thing. And he said this thing moved so fast, so quick. He goes, I don't think I hit it. He goes, I probably fired off 6 rounds at it. And then it jumps a 6-foot fence, leaps over it like it's nothing. But he said this thing moved so fast, so quick, that I couldn't get my pistol on it. And I said, was it running on 2 legs the whole time? He said, absolutely. It never went down to all fours. It was just running on 2 legs the whole time. And interesting. I mean, these guys have so many interesting encounters about their behavior, what they do, different things to look for. I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of long-winded.
Oh no, man, I enjoy it because what you're saying is stuff I've told on here before. Like when I did my video at Property X, I show a game trail. And then right to the side of that game trail, a game trail, a deer game trail is usually 6 to 8 inches wide, the most. Well, yeah. Right on the opposite side of that game trail, there's another trail that's there. Now, this trail is probably 2 foot wide. There's nothing out on Property X that makes the trail that wide, except for one thing, that's Sasquatch. And I was telling people how I've seen them hunt. Like you just said, they don't run and chase them down. I haven't seen that. Now, certain people have told me that, but I've never witnessed that. What I've witnessed them do is the same thing you just said that the man told you. They sit and wait beside that game trail. And I've even seen them use their wood knocks to like, basically, to me, it's like, okay, I'm in position. Then you'd hear another wood knock up, and it wouldn't be the same amount. Like the first one would do like 1 knock. And I guess, that was letting the other one know that, hey, I'm in position. And then you would hear 2 wood knocks up from that one. And then you would all of a sudden you'd hear 3 wood knocks. And next thing you know, here comes a deer flying down the trail, and they just reach out, grab it, snap its neck, and it's over with. They don't hoot and holler and scream when they're hunting because I've tried to explain to people, if they did that, there wouldn't be any animals nowhere for them to hunt. They'd run, they never could catch anything.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it is interesting when you hear people talk about that. I mean, their behavior is very animalistic, I think, but smart. Hunters do the same thing. You have a hunter at the top of the game trail. Then you don't want to create too much commotion to where it bolts too hard, but you kind of want to move it down the game trail where your buddy's sitting and lying and waiting for it. And these creatures do the same thing, so it's smart. Very smart.
We call it a deer drive. When I was a kid, that's what we would do. We'd take and line up across the field, and then we'd have one of our other buddies or a couple of our other buddies drive around to the other side of the woods, and they would start in the woods to flush whatever was out in those woods to flush it out towards the field so we could get a shot at it. But we used the same tactic when I was a kid doing flush hunts. Like I said, I always thought, like I said, when I heard that, somebody asked me that story about Booger Valley, I'm like, no, I hadn't really heard another story like it. But they're like, well, this right here sounds just like it. And that's why I was going to ask you, because I went back and listened to it, and I got what they're saying. It sounds like it, but them guys right there had some bad stuff going on. And like you said, basically what I got they just wanted them gone. They didn't care what they were, nothing. They just wanted them gone.
Yeah, and that's a question I get asked probably more than anything else from witnesses who have these things around their property. They're not. Everyone always asks about the camp. Why don't I have a picture of one? Why don't you have sound of these things? And you got to understand, a lot of these people, they're not into Bigfoot. They don't really care about Bigfoot. All they know is some weird being is on their property, and it's harassing them, and they want it gone. And a lot of people who have these things on their property, they just want them gone. They don't want to deal with them anymore. These brothers were getting to the point to where I don't think they would go out and just kill something to kill something. I didn't get that impression from talking to them. But they were pushed into that situation, in my opinion. I think these creatures overstepped their balance and were harassing these two guys. And they harassed the wrong two guys because they weren't opposed to physically harming them. And so it's an interesting account. And I spent a lot of time with those guys. Very nice guys and probably the most knowledgeable guys I've ever talked to on this subject, just because it was around their property. And they can tell you all sorts of things about these things.
Well, I've got another question for you. Have you ever heard of anything that you can do to deter these things, like to make them just want to leave or leave you alone?
Sometimes different things work and sometimes they don't. Like, for example, a lot of times if people will light their place up, and a lot of times even if they set up cameras, these creatures will avoid that. For whatever reason, they'll avoid that like the plague. The interesting part about the guys at the siege, what happened is they set up cameras. He would nail game cams right to the home, right underneath every window. He'd set up game cams. And he also set up motion detector lights. The first thing he did was he set up these motion detector lights. And the motion detector lights started getting smashed out with rocks. And the other thing he found, one time he was walking out, he'd see the motion detector light go off, and he'd look out the window and there's nothing there. And so he couldn't figure out, he knew they didn't like the lights, but they would throw stuff at the house, and the light would go off. And so he couldn't figure out how they kept staying out of the light, because he was going to pick one off as soon as it stepped out in the light. This was before the shooting. And what ended up happening is he's walking the property one day, and there's a pile of rocks. He comes across these weird pebbles stacked up. And he's like, that's strange. So he kicks it over. And he keeps walking. But he comes to another stack of pebbles on his property. And he couldn't figure out who's stacking up pebbles on his property. So he kicks it over. And he keeps walking around the property. Pretty soon he comes to another one. And it hit him what these pebbles are. They were within a foot of his sensor on the home of where the lights went off. And the sun was starting to set, and that's how he knew it. That they were setting up these rocks around just outside of the sensor. I don't know if that was their little marker, letting them know if you go past this point, the light goes off. But that's what the witness's impression was. They were setting up these little piles of rocks, and if you stood behind the piles of rocks, the light would never go off. If you step in front of it, the light goes off. But they ended up smashing all his lights out anyway. I know the guys did have some pretty good pictures of them. They never released them publicly. And nothing really seemed to make these things just go away. On some properties, that works. Why, I don't know.
That's interesting. What you were saying about the rocks and the lights. I had an investigation I went on where that's what I told them to do. Put up floodlights, and that worked for a while. And then they kept finding sticks. Now this yard there's not a tree nowhere out there. They had to actually they paid to have the light company come in and set, paid for extra light poles to have floodlights put on. Well, they were finding sticks that there's nowhere for that stick to come from. And what it was doing is they figured out is that's what it was doing. They were marking out with those sticks where they could, up to where they could go before the light come on. Well, that worked for a while, and then the guy changed the position of the sensor, so their sticks wouldn't work. And he said, you know what? I believe they were watching me when they seen me go up that pole and change that sensor, because they had left and were gone for like 2 days, and when they come back, all of a sudden they're starting to get the same activity they had before. Things are tapping on the windows, it's scratching the side of the house, they're running across the top of the roof, but the lights are never going out off. He's like, what the devil's going on? Well, the next morning he goes out there and starts looking at the pole. Well, he notices all the sensors to the lights are pointed straight up in the air now.
Yeah, and that doesn't shock me. I mean, I watched a video about gorillas dismantling poachers' traps, and not only dismantling them, but they were showing younger ones how to dismantle them. I believe it was gorillas, might have been chimpanzees, dismantling poacher traps. And they'd bring the young ones along, and the adult would take it apart. And so I think if you're dealing with a primate, you're not dealing with a bear. Even a bear, people use the term dumb bear. Even bears aren't dumb.
Oh, no.
But these things, that doesn't shock me to hear something like that. It really doesn't. To hear them turning the sensor up.
I didn't know if you'd heard that before, if any of them had done that before, if you'd had any reports. But he said they had to have watched him readjust that sensor, and they knew what they didn't mess with the lights. The only thing they messed with was the sensor, and they pointed it straight up in the air.
Yeah, I don't know that I may have had someone like that on the show. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head. No. I think that they can see in night vision. I had I don't know how you feel about this or not, but I remember I had a researcher on, and they were out, I'm trying to remember exactly, I think they were down in your area. They were going out to investigate this one area, and they had night vision. I know the night vision camera he had because I have the same one. And the way the night vision camera works is when you turn it on, it'll, for the most part, just use starlight. But you can click a button that shoots out an infrared beam that we can't see. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, I always tell people, like Finding Bigfoot. If you ever watch that show and they're walking around with the cameras and it looks like there's a big light on them, well, they're actually walking around in the dark. The reason why it looks like there's a light on them, it's an infrared light, it's because the camera can see it. And these guys were out in this area, and they had actually, I think they were tracking one of these creatures, and they were up on, kind of on a hill, and it was down in this meadow, and they were very close to it. And they're watching it through the night vision, and he goes, "Hey, I'm gonna turn the infrared on so I can see it better." And when you turn the infrared on, it's like shoots out a light, so it lights everything up even more than using starlight. And the moment he did that, he said the creature turned and looked right at him. The moment he clicked that button on, it was almost like hitting it with a light. He said it turned and looked right at him. It stood up and then ended up leaving. And I thought that was interesting. Maybe it's because I own that camera. I know that you can't see anything come out of that camera. There's no visible light source that pops out. And the creature's reaction kind of tells me that they can see in that spectrum.
Yeah, I don't have a camera like that. I've got a set of binoculars like that, and I've got a scope. It's a starlight scope. And if I need something illuminated real far off, starlight, in a starlight scope, people don't understand how much light that it gathers just from. But like you said, you put one of those IR lights, they make a Q-beam for an IR light, so you can actually shine it way out into a field or something, and there's actually no light going off, but you can see it through that scope. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think these creatures can see in that spectrum of light, that IR light. I firmly, because a lot of the game cameras use that same technology, and like you said, you can have it hid where you can't hardly see even the lens, but they can find that camera. Because I've had sticks, I've had rocks and everything else thrown and piled up in front of game cameras because there wasn't no way for them to get around it. So they piled stuff up in front of it, kind of like to the side, because you can watch the camera keep going off because stuff is being put in front of it, but there's no picture of nothing except for whatever's putting that rock there. You just see the rock kind of slide in front of it, or a branch or something, and that's it. And the camera's worthless now.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with you. I think that they can see in that spectrum, and I think a lot of these game cams don't fool them. Game cams don't fool your normal animals.
Nope.
You'll see cougars walk right up and look right into the game cam, even the most well hidden game cam, they'll walk, or even bears, they'll walk right up and look right, sniff the game cam. So if they know it's there, these creatures know it's there.
And see, I think that's because of smell. And a lot of people say, well, I sprayed it down with scent away. Yeah, but you brought that camera home. You opened it up in your house. You fumbled. You played with it. The whole 9 yards. You put SIM cards in it. You put batteries in it. I believe your scent gets inside that camera. A hair may get stuck in the closing mechanism or the hinge. And that little bit of scent, they can smell. They have a tremendous sense of smell.
Yeah, I think it even goes beyond smell. One time my brother and I, we were hunting. This is probably, I don't know, 2005. And we'd been out there for 2 weeks. No phones, no technology, living out there while we were hunting. And after a while, it's interesting. When you put yourself in an environment like that, there's so much noise today. There's Facebook, there's the TV. We rarely will you see anyone sit in just quiet silence. There's always some sort of background noise. There's always noise. Well, when you get out in the woods and you don't have that as an option, you'd be surprised. You really start to pick up your sense of smell gets better. Your hearing gets better. Your vision gets better. Stuff that you probably wouldn't pay attention to if you were just out hiking catches your attention a lot quicker. I think we almost kind of go back to that version of ourselves that were, foragers and living out in the wild. But what was interesting is one time we were out hunting, it's probably a week and a half, almost 2 weeks into it. And Woody and I were coming up this hill. And we didn't realize we had crossed into private property. There was no markers. You couldn't tell where private property started and where the national forest was. There was no way to tell. So we start walking up into this area, and we're coming up this hill. And I told Woody, I said, do you hear that? And he goes, yeah, it sounds like something's whining. And I was like, it's mechanical. I can't figure out what it was. There's a game cam sitting there snapping pictures of us, 2 idiots out there standing right in front of this game cam while snapping pictures of us. But what was interesting is we could hear it. Now, if I was just out hiking for the day, I probably would have never heard it. But being out there like we were, you were more sensitive to sound, and you could hear this thing. It wasn't loud, but you could hear this thing winding up and clicking, and you could hear the mechanical noise. So I think not only is it the smell, but I think they're actually a lot louder than most people realize. I think that's maybe why a lot of animals know exactly where they're at.
Yeah, I firmly believe it because I spend a lot of time, weeks, even months out in the bush somewhere or another. And like you said, the longer you stay in that environment, the more adept you become at hearing the least little thing. You can be laying in your tent at night and a leaf fall on your tent and it sounds like somebody dropped a hammer.
It's true. It's true. And it's hard for people to understand that. But what you just said is true. You become very much more sensitive of your surroundings. You can hear way better and you can smell way better and see better and leave.
Yeah, like I said, that's just the way I describe it. But like I said, you can hear so much more, and that makes you think, what am I missing with all the, and see, that's the other thing I tell people is we suscept our bodies to all kind of unnecessary punishments. And when they look at me, I said, look, these Bigfoot don't have all the stuff like you named, the Facebook, the TVs, the radios, and all that stuff. So they can hear tremendously better than we can because you put your ears through punishment on a daily basis all day long. And like I said, these creatures don't have that. And to me, I always say we are their entertainment. When we come into their environment, we're like their TV series or whatever. There's a guy that I had on last week. His name is D. Doss, and he does the same thing I do, but he's in Ohio. If he's in here, I wish he'd tell me. I cannot remember his research area, but the Outlaw Bigfoot radio show went out there and they spent like 30 minutes and said it was like the most activity and the worst place they'd been. Well, this dude goes out there every day, Wes, every day. and he's had interactions with them. Nothing's really happened real bad, but the stuff that he's been getting out of there, it's weird. He says the more time he spends there, the more comfortable he feels. I said, well, basically, I said, you're their entertainment. You haven't hurt them any kind of way. You don't carry a weapon with you. Every once in a while you have a camera. He said, yeah, when I have my camera, I noticed the activity's not as great. I said, because they associate something you put to your face or whatever you're holding in your hand. They don't know the difference in a camera and a gun. They know a human's got something in his hand. Usually that means he's going to try to hurt me or they shoot at me with that thing. But he said, it's odd. The more time he stays there and he keeps going back and forth, I said, well, think of it this way. They can hear your vehicle coming from a long ways off. Every vehicle, if you can listen to it, makes a distinct noise when it comes. They have learned to hear your vehicle, and when you come, they know, hey, look, that guy's coming back, and they get all excited because it's like you, when you were a kid, your favorite TV show's coming on, so you're all excited, you're sitting there and you're ready, That's the way I explain it to him, and the way I look at it is, like I said, we're their entertainment, and he's just entertaining them.
Yeah, you got to be careful in that, though. I know it sounds happy with the whole entertainment thing, but based on witnesses and the way I feel towards it, I think if they're coming in, I don't want them getting too comfortable with me, and I'm not going to get too comfortable with them.
That's the same thing I told him. I said what he needed to do is see supposedly there's only one road that goes into his research area. I said, well, that's a bad thing. You don't need to drive all the way down the road. I told him, I said, you need to find an alternate place to park or whatever. Come in a different vehicle, come different times of the day, the night. So that's the same thing I do at Property X. I try never to park in the same place twice if I can help it. I come in multiple different vehicles. I may park and walk a mile before I enter the woods. And I don't leave out the same way I come in because, like you said, that can be bad. They can learn your habits just like anything else and be waiting on you.
Yeah.
You don't know what kind of mood. Like I said, I told him the same thing, Wes. And he had carried a jar of peanut butter out one time. Now, I understand what he done, but I told him, I said, look, habituating a feeding area is not a good idea. But what he did was basically, it was a science experiment. And, I told him, I said, well, it's up to you, but, one time may be all right. I understand what he was doing. He took a jar of peanut butter out there to where he's at, and I think it's Brownstone, or what is the name of that place? I can't remember. But anyway, he took a jar of peanut butter, and Brown Springs, that's where he's at, Brown Springs. I don't know if you've heard of the place or not.
No, I don't think I have.
Well, like I said, it's supposed to be the Outlaw Radio show, they made it out to be like one of the worst places ever and all kind of stuff like that, but that's neither here nor there. But he took the jar of peanut butter out there with him. He took the top off of it, removed the little foil piece. He took his finger, stuck in it while he was out there, put it in his mouth, and if they're watching, which more likely they were, let him see him put it in it, him eat it, and it didn't hurt him. He screwed the top back on, kind of snug, and then sit it down on top of a log and left it. Now he came back, like I think he said a couple of days later, nothing had touched the peanut butter. But he said the weird thing was, as like I said, he's got this one place he parks his truck. He walks in. He said, I parked my truck and started in on the trail that I take to go to my research area, which is not a normal trail. It's off the beaten path. He said, and there's a dead goat there with its neck broke. He said he takes it as they left him a gift because he left them something. I said, well, it could be also been a warning. You see what we did to this goat. This can happen to you too. You don't look at everything like that. But he said they didn't touch the peanut butter. But he said, well, he was wondering if they could take the lid off the peanut butter. That would have to have been a Squatch or a dog man or whatever. He said, because I had it on pretty good. And I don't believe any other animal. He said no bear could take it off. He said I don't even think a raccoon, even though they got kind of hands, they could have took it off. Now I've heard of people doing that before, to test an area, but I don't like habituating in no kind of way. It's just a bad. I've seen too many bad things come out of it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It reminded me of a guy. He never came on the show, and this is probably 2 years ago. But he wanted to call me to tell me how much of an a-hole I was. And I was like, okay, well, I'll entertain this. So I called the guy, and he was telling me that these are gentle creatures, and the people I have on the show, he doesn't believe any of the encounters because they're aggressive, and these things are very gentle, very kind, thoughtful creatures. And what I was telling him at the time was, hey, listen, not everyone has an aggressive encounter. I get it. If your encounter isn't aggressive, I can understand why someone would feel that way, but that's not really reality. That doesn't happen all the time. It's kind of like the video I was watching of a grizzly bear walking down this beach. I think it's in Canada, with her cubs. And this old woman and her mother are sitting there on the beach, and they're laughing. And look how cute this bear is. And this grizzly bear is probably 1,200 pounds, walking down with its cubs. And I'm thinking, you guys need to. It's not diverting where it's walking; it's coming right for them. And I'm thinking, especially with its cubs, you guys need to back off. I assumed this thing was going to kill them. Well, the grizzly bear walks right past this woman, and she films it with her iPhone the whole time, cubs and all, within feet, and just walks right past him and keeps walking down the beach. So I guess if that's your encounter of a grizzly bear, you would assume they're kind, gentle creatures, when in reality, grizzly bear is very aggressive and can rip you limb from limb if it wanted to, and probably would most of the time, especially a mother with her cubs. But going back to the point I was trying to make with this guy, and he was telling me about, he would go out and feed him every day. He'd leave food out for him. He would, leave all sorts of food. They would come up and eat the food. He was going to get pictures of them, and he just thought they were the best thing in the world. Well, they ended up going on vacation for 2 weeks. He wasn't at the home, and he lived on kind of a smaller farm. When they come back from vacation, it killed all his animals, horses and everything. Didn't eat anything, just broke all the horse's neck, broke the sheep's neck, broke a goat's neck, killed his dogs. Every animal on that property had its neck broke. And they started getting really aggressive. They'd come up, start banging on the house, growling through the window at these people. And I think his wife and his kids ended up leaving. But and I don't remember what happened. He left that home. He eventually just left because it got so bad. But that just goes to show you, just because your interaction, you're feeding them, you take that away, there's going to be some recourse for you not feeding them anymore.
Oh yeah, they want their food, and I relate them to a child throwing a temper tantrum. Is the way I put it. I told this story before. I know you haven't heard it probably, or somebody else may have told it to you. But I got a report. This has been a long time ago. It was this elderly woman. She was by herself, and she had a habit of every day going out, pouring her bacon grease and her leftovers out by this stump. Well, she got to where she couldn't get around like she liked and everything. Well, she couldn't do that anymore. Well, one night she lived on this this road went by her house, and it was like she was down this long driveway, and there wasn't any other houses on that road. Well, this guy was driving by, and all of a sudden he sees this giant creature cross the road, and under his arm, he said, was a woman with long white hair. And he got to thinking, well, the old woman that lives down in that house down there by herself, she's got white hair. Well, he calls the law and everything. They go out there and look. The back door is tore completely off the hinges. The kitchen's been ransacked, and the woman is gone. They never did find her. I don't know if you've heard anything like that before, but like I said, I looked into that report, and I firmly believe those Sasquatches were, coming up there, getting fed all the time. And when she got to where she couldn't feed them, they got aggravated, broke into her house, and they're like, well, you've been giving us food, so we're going to take you with us until you give us food again. Or they decided to eat her instead.
Yeah, I have heard that. I do remember something like that. I remember hearing an encounter with the Sasquatch that had an old woman over its shoulder. And I can't remember the details of it, but I have heard that from somewhere.
Yeah, well, I said I come across it a long time ago, and like I said, and I kind of went and was in that area and did a little research, and it was in the local paper. And the way the guy describes it in the local paper to the news reporter, he said he was carrying her. She was limp, but he was carrying her under her arm like a sack of potatoes, and he could see her long white hair. You know, he couldn't see her face, and it was just draped down. And he just knew it was that woman that Sasquatch had, but he didn't know what, he didn't call it a Sasquatch. He just said a creature.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Dennis Martin case that David Pilates talks about in his, I think it was in his first book. One part of that story no one ever really addresses. And I don't know if you're aware of this boy that disappeared. He was playing hide and seek with his friends, and his dad and another family was there. And the dad said he saw the boy going behind a bush that was 75 yards away, and they did hide and seek, and then they're telling all the kids to come out that haven't been found yet. And his boy was one of them, and he never saw his boy again. Just vanished.
Yeah, I heard that story. It was in his first book, I think. I think it's where I read that at.
Well, the interesting part about that story is there was another witness to that whole thing, down trail about 3 miles, walking the trail. And what the witnesses told the FBI agents is they saw a bear running on 2 legs with what appeared to be a little boy over its shoulder. And they just thought it was a bear running on 2 legs.
I didn't hear that part. Now, see, that's what I'd have been looking into. But, you know, when the FBI and stuff get involved in something, most of these cases that have anything to do with Sasquatch, it's anything but a Sasquatch, and they go the opposite direction of whatever evidence goes in that direction. It never fails. I've seen it myself too many times. That's like you were talking about mimicking earlier. I've told this story about 1 million times on here. And because this is up towards where your area is, I explained to people, we were hiking, we were going for a search and rescue on the back side of Mount St. Helens. And when I tell people there's no road, there's no access for a vehicle on the back side, you can probably attest to this. There is not, unless it drops out of a helicopter in the sky somehow, you ain't getting a vehicle up there.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, we were on one ridge right before you start up the main summit to Mount St. Helens, and all of a sudden you start hearing a freaking car alarm go off. Now, from a distance, it sounds just like a car alarm. Meek, meek, meek. And we're sitting there looking at each other like, how in the hell did they get a car over there? Well, we had to go in that general direction, and every so often it would do it again. But the closer we got, we noticed that it stopped really sounding like a car alarm. It sounded like something trying to sound like a car alarm, but at the end of it, it just didn't sound right. I can't explain it, but it sounded like somebody was making the noise, but they had to have some tremendous lungs. We never did find what was making that noise, but like I said, we never did find a car anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah, and there's nothing on the backside of that mountain. I mean, you're right. You practically have to be dropped in by a helicopter. I mean, it's impossible to get back there. Yeah. And I had a guy on the show one time. He saw these creatures several times, and the one part that always confused him is he said in the middle of the night he'd be awoken by what sounded like forklifts backing up. You know, that beep, 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 beep. It sounded like forklifts backing up. And he said, I could never figure out where the sound was coming from. But he said it wasn't quite right. The sound was a little bit off, but it reminded him of a forklift backing up. And it didn't hit him till one day he was driving home, and about 5 miles from his home is a huge distribution center. This guy lives in the middle of nowhere, but along that, there's a distribution center out there with forklifts and trucks that back up all the time, and it's around this wooded area. And he was asking me, he goes, do they mimic sounds like that? He goes, because I hear it at night really close to my window, and it sounds like a forklift backing up. but there's no forklifts nearby. The nearest anything close to that's about 5 miles away. So it's interesting that they would mimic. I've heard them mimicking train sounds, calling people's names. The property I was telling you about in Washington State, the wife had stepped out one day and thought her husband wasn't home. And she told me, she goes, I heard from the wood line. Now keep in mind, this woman has hours and hours and hours of them chattering, of different noises that they do. And she was out on the back porch and she thought she heard her name being called off in the distance. You'd hear this thing go, Sarah, Sarah. But she said it didn't sound right. There was something off by it. She couldn't figure out who was calling her name. Well, on the property, the husband, they'll be out in different areas and he'll call for his wife, Sarah, Sarah, you over there? And he'll yell his wife's name. And she claims she's heard it several times out there. Something calling her name from out in the woods, just Sarah. Not that I think they know what Sarah means. I think they're just mimicking what they've heard.
That, and they know that she responded to whatever that noise was that they were mimicking. I've heard that where people would go out to call their animals and stuff, and as soon as they go to leave out the door and start to call their animals back up from the fields or whatever, something else would be at the back of the wood line making the same call, and the animals are standing there dumbfounded, like, which direction do I go? Because I've got where I usually go, someone calling me, and I got somebody calling me that sounds just like that from over here.
Yeah.
I've gotten several reports of that. Hey, do you feel like taking a couple of questions out of the chat room?
Sure.
You got any questions?
Oh, we have a bunch.
Okay.
Somebody wanted to know, has anyone come across three-toed Sasquatch tracks? Oh, I cannot talk tonight. Sorry.
Yes, I have had reports of them. I've seen pictures of it. Whether it's a Sasquatch track or something else, I don't know, because it's very odd and it looks very deformed. Not as much as you would think, but I have come across those. And to say they're Sasquatch, I don't know for sure if it's Sasquatch, but I have seen three-toed tracks that looked very odd, and I couldn't tell you what creature put its foot down and made those tracks.
I'm the same way. I've gotten reports of 3 toes, 2 toes, 4 toes, but without being there to try to figure out what it is, there's no way to tell what it is.
Yeah, very odd looking tracks, though. They do look like Sasquatch tracks. I will say that. They just, something's, and two, when you look at a track, a lot of times, I think even as us as humans, I think if we didn't wear shoes and we walked around barefooted all the time, I think our foot structure would be a little bit different. So sometimes when you see a track where it looks like 3 toes, or it looks like 4 toes, you might just be missing the toe. But I don't want to discount those tracks I've seen, because I have seen some very odd tracks, pictures of very odd tracks.
All right.
Next question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there really paranormal activity related to Sasquatch? And if so, what kind?
That's a difficult question to answer. I never bought into the paranormal stuff before. I always brushed it off. But I have had a few accounts from very credible people that have had odd things happen around their property, and strange things happen around their property that don't seem to be of a physical nature. Now, are they running into something demonic, or is it presenting itself as a Sasquatch? I don't know, because most of the Sasquatch reports I get are from like chance encounters. Hunters run into them, hikers run into them, campers run into them, and they seem to be very physical, like a physical being, physical non-human primate is how I would categorize it. But I have gotten some strange reports that I'm really not sure what to make of. What was the second portion of that question?
The question was, is there really paranormal activity related to Sasquatch? And if so, what kind of paranormal activity?
I can tell you about 2 encounters. I can tell you about these 2 brothers I had on the show. You guys may not be interested in that, but And that was a very, very interesting account of strange paranormal activity. There's a guy that contacted me here in Washington State who had just gotten out of the military. I think he did like 3 or 4 tours in Iraq, and he had some PTSD, so he went up to stay in this cabin his friends owned. Well, there was no electricity and there was no running water. That kind of describes the cabin to you. And it was in a place called Snohomish, Washington. Now, Snohomish, Washington is notorious for Sasquatch sightings. It's probably one of the best areas if you want to see one of these creatures to go. But he was up in this cabin, and the interesting part is he didn't want to come on the show. He just wanted to tell me what happened. And so he's out on this property, and he would fish during the day and get water, get firewood, and just trying to get his mind off of the, being in the war and probably some of the things he had done. And he kept running into these monkeys. And that's exactly how he'd describe them. He said they look like big apes running around on this property, big ape/monkey running around this property. And he would see them all the time. And they freaked this guy out because they would start throwing rocks at the cabin in the middle of the night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd hear like boulder-sized rocks hitting the side of the wall. He went up to a couple of windows and was face-to-face with them. And so it freaked him out. What really freaked this guy out is he said that they chatter back and forth at night. He'd hear them almost like a conversation's going on, chattering back. And he couldn't understand what they were saying, but they'd be chattering back and forth. And he said the night he was going to leave the next day because he heard a laugh. And he said the only way I can describe the laugh is it sounded like Jabba the Hutt laughing. But the final straw that made this guy leave is he said he saw one up in a tree, and it was nothing but it was a total physical being, and it made eye contact with him. And he said it jumped out of the tree and it disappeared. And he didn't know if he was losing his mind. He didn't know if he just ran into a demon. He didn't know what he had seen, but he packed up his stuff and he left. But this guy, when he was describing what was going on around this property, he was describing very much physical beings running around. And he said it just vanished. He said he has no way of it. And this guy's very down to earth. He said, I have no way to explain it. I can't tell you. He goes, I know the term cloaking gets thrown around. He goes, I don't know what cloaking means, but this thing vanished. So there is kind of weird things that going on, like batteries running out. I can go into the brother story. It's kind of a long story, but they had some weird things going on their property. I don't know. Does that answer the question? Not really, I guess.
I'm with you. I think they're very much flesh and blood. I'll listen to somebody, whatever story they have to tell, but I'm more along the beat you are. Flesh and blood, regular things. Go with it. Go ahead, Lakay.
Marissa wants to know, Wes, how much do you know about Bigfoot's vocals and mimicking humans?
Do you want to answer that, Wes, or you want to leave that one alone?
No, I can answer it. I mean, okay. As far as what I know, it's stuff that's been told to me. I always tell people I don't have one in my garage I'm studying, so I'm not an expert. And until I have one in my garage I'm studying, I tell people I don't know any more than anyone else out there.
Hey, when you get one, can you call me? Because I got a few questions I need to answer.
No, but they do have a strange vocal cord. The lady that I had on the show that I had to take down, what ended up happening in that particular encounter, me talking with her and going over everything with her, we talked about the vocal cords, and she sure seemed to know a lot about the vocal cords. And she said they actually have 2 sets of vocal cords, and one is more closer to our vocal cords, and the other vocal cord is very much more like a great ape or a gorilla. And so she said they can mimic a lot of noises. That's why gorillas can't mimic. They can roar, they can scream, they can grunt. But she said that's why they can mimic noises they hear or people's names. She said when you hear them speaking Spanish or speaking Choctaw, or she said that's kind of true. They don't know the language, but if they're around people speaking Spanish, they will try to mimic that. But what she said is they had two separate vocal cords, and one is very much more like ours, and the other side of the vocal cord is very much like a non-human primate. That's why they can roar and do a lot of things you hear gorillas do. I hope that answers the question.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Chaos Theory Productions, who I'm also doing a collaboration with, wanted to know, there have been reports of people seeing UFOs while in the woods. Then right after, a very angry Bigfoot shows up. Do you think the two are related or just coincidences?
I'm trying to think how to answer that question. Because it's not a simple answer. My personal opinion is I think that it's two separate phenomena going on. I'll give you an example. I had a guy on the show one time. He told me that Sasquatches were aliens. And so I sat and listened to what this guy had to say, because some of his descriptions and some of the things he talked about, unless he had seen one, there's no way that this guy would have known different things. So I was convinced that this guy truly had Sasquatch on his property. The reason why he thought they were aliens, he also had probably some of the best pictures of UFOs I've ever seen in my life, taken from his backyard. And I think what was going on that property, he never saw the two related, but there was these two separate things going on his property where he'd run into Sasquatches all the time, and he also saw UFOs all the time. And so I think that there are two separate issues going on. I hope they're not as related as, well, I don't want to go into that, but that would be my stock public answer.
I'm with you, because like I said, that can be a touchy answer, because like I said, I personally have never seen a UFO with a Bigfoot or a Bigfoot with a UFO, but anything is possible. And if they're abducting us, like most people think, why wouldn't they abduct this other thing that looks like us?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and there's just so many things we don't know. If I just came out and said, there's some weird thing, well, that would be a whole, I'll have to come back, I'll explain that whole thing, but there's a story I want to go into, but I'll end up rambling for the next hour on it, but I agree with you. I think there are two separate things going on. But a lot of times these investigators, and I hate the term researcher, because you always ask a researcher what they're researching, and most of the time they can't tell you what they're actually researching. But yeah, I guess that's semantics. But a lot of times, they'll have these firm answers on, oh no, it's this, or oh no, it's that, and no one really knows. No one's dragged one in, or no one has one in their garage they're studying, so no one truly knows. But I think that the UFOs and the Bigfoot, I think, are two separate. That's my theory.
I like that theory because it kind of fits with mine. And what I think is unique about you, Wes, is you're not just talking about stuff that, I don't know if most people know this, y'all. He's not just talking about things that someone else has told him or he's guessing. Him and his brother had one of the hellacious damn encounters that I've ever heard. I don't see how that Wes is sitting here talking to us. That's the difference in between him and most other talk show hosts and stuff, is because he's actually seen not one but several of these things, and they wasn't nice the first time he seen them. Am I right about that, Wes?
Yeah, it wasn't. It was a terrifying encounter, and they scared me. And for the longest time, the way I would host the show is, and I used to say this on the show, that I think every one of them should be shot, kill them all, and let God figure it out. And that's the way I felt about it for the longest time. I thought that these things were monsters. And when someone would come on and talk about how it really wasn't an aggressive encounter, or they think that they're gentle creatures, I used to cringe on hearing that. But, I've come to the conclusion, especially from doing the show, the more you get into this, the more you realize how little you actually know. And when I hear the word expert, I always cringe when I hear that, because it always amazes me to hear guys that have been doing this for 40, 50 years, 30, 40 years. I've been in researching for 30, 40, 50 years, but you know, and I haven't been doing it by any means that long, but you know, as you start getting into this, it seems like it gets weirder and weirder and weirder. For example, like the lights. Now, when people would say they would see these balls of light, I would laugh at it until I saw one for myself. And I think that was the point where I really started opening up and being more apt to hearing what people say. You know, a lot of these researchers, if you say, well, it disappeared in front of me or this or that, they'll just laugh at you and send you on your way. And I'll stop and listen to what people have to say on it. No matter how weird it is, I'll stop and listen to what people have to say. And I think that's really benefited me, especially from doing the show, because people know when they come on the show, I'm not going to beat them up verbally. I'm not going to laugh at them. I mean, I had a guy on just a couple weeks ago. I think it was on the Christmas show. He was talking about seeing a little green man. And that was my favorite part of the show. Probably the most fascinating part of the show. Would I have done that 3 years ago? Put someone like that on the air? Probably not. But I think as you learn and study about this, you start coming to the conclusion you really don't know as much as you might think you do about the world around us. I hope that answers the question. I feel like I'm just rambling.
Oh no.
It's been a long day.
Oh no, that's the way I feel, Wes. That's like I tell people. I'm no expert. I'm well knowledged in certain things, but every time, like when I go out to Property X, I learn something different. Every time I talk to even one of my guests in here or one of the people in the chat or whatever, I've learned a lot of stuff. To me, a person that calls themselves an expert is done closed themselves off from wanting to learn from anybody else because they know it all. I'm like you. I like the term researcher better because you're trying to find out what's next.
Yeah. No, I'll have to tell you the brothers encounter. But go ahead, Kayla. I didn't mean to cut you off. What was the next question?
Next question. What hurts was used to lure out the Sasquatches, West? He forgot the episode though, and this is from Hammertoe 2000.
I'll have to go back and listen. I believe it was 142. Is what he's referring to. Going back to, I want to say maybe it was 140. I'll have to go back and listen to the show. I can't remember off the top of my head. I apologize to the audience member asking the question. I've been up since 2, so bear with me. Or since about 6. What he's referring to is the lady I had on the show that was part of that kill team. There was a weapon they were using. And I believe it was 140 some odd hertz. And it drives these things crazy. They'll come right into that hertz when you shoot it out. But it's a weapon that the military is using that drives these things nuts. And they will come to the whatever weapon they're using. She had a name for it. And she explained why it drives them nuts and why this certain frequency, why they're using that frequency. To bring them in, but what she described it as, the person that uses a weapon is called the controller, and when they fire that frequency out, the creatures come in, and it makes it easier to kill them.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go into what you told me about how she said to kill them, because I don't want somebody to go out and needlessly kill one of these things if it's not necessary. Like I said, I understand if you're trying to protect yourself. But just to go out and kill one, to be killing one, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't look. What is your thought on that, Wes?
I would like to see one shot and brought in. I think the problem with that, though, is I think the government would step in, take the body, and probably threaten you, tell you to shut your mouth, and bad things will happen if you keep talking about it. I would like to see one shot. I'm not a big fan of killing something to kill something. And if I thought the government would leave you alone, I would say one probably has to be shot and brought in, put on public display, let people know these things are out there. There's too many people going missing in the woods, and there's too many bad things that happen. You know, a lot of times when people run into these creatures, they are damaged in some way afterwards, whether it be mentally, Now, I've talked to a lot of alcoholics off the air that have ran into these things that can't come to terms with the encounter they had. I think there's a lot of PTSD, especially with aggressive encounters with these things. I would like to see it proven, but I think the government will put the kibosh on that if someone ever did.
See, that's what I think too. That's the reason why I say I don't think killing one's going to do any good just to be killing one, because it's still never going to reach the public. Because, like you said, I firmly believe that if I was to put on the air tonight that I had went out and killed one and I had the body laying right here in the floor, that tomorrow morning, but before daylight, there would be people here to collect that body and do exactly what you said.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I think so too. I really do.
Lakaya, what's another one?
Give me 2 seconds, boss man. My little baby Absol wanted in the office door.
Oh, Lord. Now you're going to have me explain to Wes what Absol is.
She was. Did you hear the squeal? That was her.
Yeah. Wes, Lakaya hates the name Dogman. She just absolutely hates it. So she decided to change the name to Absol.
Nice. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Dogman either. I just can't think of what else to call it. I know the government lady, she calls it like a M176Z or something like that. They have some weird name for it, but I hate the term Dogman, but what else do you call it?
Well, you can borrow Lakaya's Absol. And what an Absol is a Pokemon.
Oh, I gotcha.
And like I said, that's her little thing. So she don't have to call it Dogman because she absolutely hates it. But that reminds me of what you were just saying about the government having a number for it. I explained to these people. Somebody asked once before. I was trying to explain to the listeners. I mean that the government has a handbook for everything. Now it doesn't mean that it's going to be labeled how to crank a Jeep or whatever. It'll have some designation code or whatever. And I've told them that the government does know about these things. And the military has guidelines. They have a book that they can go by to deal with these creatures.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly what she said.
But go ahead, Lakaya.
Okay. Next question. Has anyone heard of these Sasquatches that can recognize the sound of an engine, such as a car or truck, to the point where they follow the person home?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, because that's what I was telling Dee. That's one of the reasons why I don't go in the same vehicle all the time, because, like I said, car engines, I know mechanics that you can blindfold, carry them out to a racetrack, and they can tell you how many Chevrolets and how many Fords are running. So if they can do that, it's something else that doesn't have anything but time on its hands can learn the difference in between that pickup that drives by every day at between 4 and 5 o'clock because that's the person going home, and the little bitty car that's coming up here because these people right here are going to leave me food. Yes, I believe they firmly can learn the difference.
Yeah, I mean, even dogs can. I know when I go to my brother's house, this isn't a great example, but when I go to my brother's house, he has a pit bull, and that dog barks at everything. And what's weird is when I pull up, it never barks. And when I open the door, it's sitting there waiting for me, wagging its tail. Anyone else pulls up and that dog comes unglued. And I think that she knows the sound of my car.
I believe that too. What's the next question, Lakaya?
Do you think that their feet are actually padded like a dog's?
Yes. I've talked to many witnesses that have actually seen the feet, and that's how they describe the bottom portion of the feet, like it has some sort of pad on it, like you'd see on a dog's. I've had several of them on the show, and that's exactly how they describe them. The interesting part is when you look at a lot of the tracks, and I think that's where they fight, whether it's a monkey or a human. The only argument I'd make to it being more on our side of the family tree is their feet. And I have several casts here in my office, and when you look at the cast, it looks very human-like, just on a large scale. But it looks just like someone without their shoes on, out walking around. And so, yeah, I definitely think that they have padding on their feet.
I'm gonna go with that answer too. I think it may be like a buildup of a callus after years and years of walking without their exposed feet. Yeah, I because I think humans can do that too.
Yeah, I think that they are more. I would say it's probably more genetically disposed to be that way, to have the padding on the feet. You know, if they had feet like ours, you wouldn't last very long out there running around the snow in the in Mother Nature. You'd succumb to Mother Nature very quickly. And so I think that they're genetically disposed to have a pad on their foot, much like a non-human primate or like a dog. Dog is the same way.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. Okay, what's the next one?
Let's see. Wes, do you think they are Gigantopithecus or something different altogether?
I think that there's something different altogether. I don't think it's Gigantopithecus we're chasing. I think Gigantopithecus was a real ape at one time. The interesting part is when they looked at the teeth of Gigantopithecus, it wasn't a meat eater, from what these experts say. That it ate bamboo and ate plants. It was very much had a vegetarian, like a great ape. Great apes aren't meat eaters by any means. Chimpanzees a different story, but your great apes don't eat meat. They very much eat vegetation, and that's when they examined the teeth. That's what they came up with. I know a lot of people think it's Gigantopithecus, and I can kind of see why, because when they talk about the size of the creature and what it looks like, and a lot of the artist renditions, even though we don't have a full body, a lot of the artist renditions, when you look at it, you go, "Oh, that's a Sasquatch," and it does. Based on the artist rendition of what it looked like. But I think that these things are a different type of creature. Somehow, I think they're close to us in the tree, but I still think it's a wild animal, and I think it's a non-human primate, but I don't think it's Gigantopithecus.
I'm kind of like you. I believe it's something altogether different. I don't know if it's evolution or something else, but I'm like you. I believe it's something totally different, and I think there's more than. I think it's kind of like dogs. There's more than one kind, because in the canine world, you got Rottweilers, German Shepherds are all dogs, but they look different because the ones down in Florida don't look like the ones in Alaska.
Yeah, and you're right. You do get different descriptions. I've talked to witnesses that said it looked very much like a human who had Down syndrome. The body of it reminded them of an ape, but the face was very much human-like, and the way it acted, its expressions. There was a witness I had on the show one time, and he was saying he was sitting there with his sisters, and he looks up and looks out they had this big, tall glass window, and he said it was about 7 feet tall, this huge glass window, and he sees this creature leaning down. So it must have been 8.5, 9 feet tall if it has to lean down to look in this window. And the witness was looking at it, and he described it from head to, from about the top of its head down to its belly. And he said it reminded him of a Native American who had Down syndrome and might have been mildly retarded. I hope that doesn't offend the audience. That's how he described it. But he said it had high cheekbones, it had black eyes, and had a mouth just like we do, just on a bigger scale. And it didn't have any facial hair, but the rest of the body was all covered in hair. And he said that him and his sisters were playing a game at the table. And when he looked up, it was looking at his sister. And he said it was goofy. That's how he described it. And I said, "Well, what do you mean goofy?" And he goes, it kind of reminded him of like a nerd in the room that's looking at the pretty girl doing something. He said its eyes would get real big, and then its eyes would get kind of small. It'd look down, and it was doing different facial features as it was looking at it. And he said it was very animated until it made eye contact with him. And when it made eye contact with him, he said the face went to like a stone face, and it turned around and walked off. And they ended up finding, I want to say it was 18 or 19-inch tracks outside that window the next day, standing right in front of that window. So you just never know. I mean, sometimes you talk to witnesses and they'll say that it was very much ape looking, or it was very much like a chimpanzee, and so you get different descriptions. That's why I'm not so sure about Gigantopithecus.
Yeah, I can attest to that because, like I said, I've seen them in different states, different areas. I've even seen them in the same. I call it a troop or tribe. In the same one where some will have cone-shaped heads and some will have rounded heads, and the ones with the rounder heads, to me, that's what what I was telling you. It looks like a person with Down syndrome. So, like I said, I like that. I'm a firm believer that, and that's what I like about my audience. Wes, is they give, the questions they ask and stuff. That's why I like doing this.
Yeah, great questions.
Yeah. What's next, Lakea?
Okay, this is from Maggie. Regarding tree knocks, are they always knocking on the trees, or do they clap their hands to make the sound instead?
That's an interesting question. With the tree knocks, I've had witnesses on before. I had a kid on one time, and they had him on this property. It's kind of like your encounter where he grew up on this property with his grandfolks, and his grandparents knew about him, told him about him, and so he always assumed growing up it was just another wild animal. He ended up shooting a deer on the property, and he said the Sasquatch came out, and it was standing there looking right at him, right next to his deer. And so he said he put the barrel of his gun towards the ground and just stood there, and he was shocked. It was the first time he'd actually seen one. He had heard about him, growing up from his grandfather, but he hadn't actually seen one until that time. And what was interesting is he said it picked up a rock and it hit it against a tree 3 times. And he heard another one whooping off in a direction, and then that creature went in that direction. But what's interesting is it didn't use a stick. It was using a rock. And a lot of times, I'm not sure why they do it, if it's a way to signal. But I mean, I've had witnesses on where it has a stick in its hand and is beating on a tree. I had a witness one time who saw a smaller one just rapidly beating on a tree, and he said it sounded like a semi truck coming. And pretty soon, here comes the mother, he assumed, of this thing, but it was just the thing was just beating on a tree with the stick. But why they do it, I couldn't tell you. But I don't know that it could be clapping too. I just think it's interesting that they seem to use. I even had a witness one time that told me he had seen one hit a tree with its open fist or open palm. And he said it sounded just like a wood knock you would hear on TV or you hear these researchers talk about, but it had actually used its hand and hit this tree twice. And he said with a baseball bat, he doesn't think he could have made as much noise as this thing did. Just pow, pow as it's using its hand.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like I said, I've seen them hit on trees and stuff like that. And at the time, I thought they were using their hand or a small stick, but it could have been a rock because I was a pretty good distance away. I try to keep my distance if I can because I don't want to crowd them because I believe they're like any other animal. If you crowd them, they can be unpredictable. That's like at the property the last time I did a video, I was tracking one I thought that had just killed a deer, and I was trying to keep my distance, but I think I got a little too close because right at the end of the video, I didn't catch it on video, but you could hear something go, oh. I'm like, okay, it's time to back up. To me, anytime something growls at me, I back up.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it's a dog or whatever. That means you're doing something they don't like. So
I'm with you.
Their first instinct is, audio, which is growling, because I can't see them because, snarling or whatever is not going to work because I can't see what they're doing, but they can definitely growl, and I'm giving them some more space. Like I said, that's what I was telling you. I don't want to, out there on that property, I don't want to make them, so aggravated at me that, hey, look, he's just coming in and harassing us and they leave, or either they make me leave.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Well, man, I appreciate you doing this right here. Like I said, I know we're keeping you. You don't feel good and stuff. If you want to, Like I said, if you want to, we can keep going, answer some more questions or
Yeah.
whatever.
Is there any more questions?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a bunch.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Wes, do you plan on any upcoming expeditions back to the Big Thicket?
Hey, Wes, if for you answer that, if you go, I want to go with you, but we gotta bring DW with us. I've been trying to get him to go out with me.
Yeah. No, it's a blast going down with those guys. I don't have any plans on going down there. I've been so busy with the show. Even when they were doing the expeditions, I never even got a chance to go down there with those guys. But I really enjoy going out with those guys. But I don't have any plans on the books as far as going. I need to get back out there, though. I really enjoy it.
Hey, when you decide to go that way, you give me a holler and I'll go with you if you can't find nobody else to go. And like I said, I'll try to trick DW into coming with me.
Tell them it's a vacation.
Yeah, tell him it's a vacation. Yeah, we're going to have to do him like Mr. T. We're going to have to drug him.
Yeah. I'm all for it.
Hey, it sounds fun to me. I think I can round up a couple of my little minions running around here. I don't know if Lakea will go. You know, she's kind of like DW. She likes to be snug in the vault here.
Yeah,
But,
I hear you.
what else we got, Lakea?
I like this next question. Do you think Bigfoot and Sasquatch get ill like humans, such as the flu or a cold? And if you do think they get ill like that, do you think they would use plants as medicine?
I don't know exactly how to answer that. You go ahead, Wes.
Well, I have talked to some Native Americans, and I had Tom Seawood on. He wasn't the only one I heard this from, but he has a working hypothesis that smallpox wiped these things out up in northern Canada back when I don't want to say the white man, but you know what I mean, when we started coming over and brought, our illnesses and everything. Well, it wiped out most of the Native Americans in that area because of smallpox. And you would think, we're just as much of a predator as Sasquatch is. So anytime you get rid of one predator, the other main predator in the area seems to flourish. And in that area, they didn't flourish. In fact, the sighting reports went almost down to nothing. And even as the population of the natives, the First Nation people came back, the sightings weren't there. And so something wiped those creatures out. And again, I'm speculating on all this. I really don't know, but it's an interesting hypothesis. I had a guy on the show one time. I don't think he actually came on, but it was a hunter who saw one of these creatures, and he was in a deer stand. And what alerted him to the creature is he could have sworn he heard coughing, and it sounded like a very deep, deep cough. And he thought, oh, there's another hunter out here. It was his little honey hole of a hunting spot, and so he was pissed off. And he ended up seeing one of these creatures step out of the brush and kind of cross over a meadow back into the woodline. And where that creature had stepped out was where he was hearing this coughing sound. But you hear them take strange things like garlic. Tom Seawood talks about that all the time. Why would they take garlic? Garlic's terrible. I can't imagine any wild animal really wanting to eat garlic. Some people out there might like garlic, but I just can't see a wild animal eating garlic. And he talks about his garlic being taken almost on a nightly basis. And garlic is very much great for your immune system. If the bugs are eating, mosquitoes are after you, eat a bunch of garlic and they'll leave you alone. So it's an interesting question. I guess I don't know the answer to it. I would assume if they're close to us on the family tree, they would be susceptible to different diseases. The story I told you in the beginning about the one that appeared to have a stroke, was it using one portion of his arm? The witness's impression was it had been shot, probably with a shotgun. And that's why it lost use of that one arm. I don't know necessarily that it was a stroke that the creature had. I think he's probably right. It probably was injured in some way. But I would think that they probably, I don't know about the common cold, but you can transfer illnesses from humans to animals and back and forth. Throughout history, you see that. And so I think that they are susceptible to probably some of the same diseases we are.
Well, I know this. That cough brought something to my memory. Something up in my memory. I was out one time, and I know, because I watched this squatch walk in between these trees, and it stopped. And I'm sitting there waiting for it to come back out, because I'm standing still because I don't think at the time he had seen me, and I heard a sneeze. And there's nobody else around, and it came from the direction where that squatch was, but it was a loud, weird snake, but it was a sneeze, and it just kind of like and walked on. I don't know if that's what it did was sneeze, but it sounded like a sneeze. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody else say that you heard one snake, they heard one snake, but like I said, I swear I heard a Sasquatch sneeze.
Yeah, and it makes sense that they would. I mean, I could completely believe that and understand that. I can't think of a specific encounter where someone's talked about that, but it would make sense that they would.
Oh, like I said, that's I know I watched this squatch, and like I said, this was back in my younger days, and like I said, I wasn't tracking them or trying to find them. I happened to be I would say in the wrong spot at the wrong time. No, it was probably 100 yards in between us, maybe a little less. And I'd walked. I mean, I seen it come from a little clearing into another scope of woods, and I froze. And like I said, it's not coming at me; it's walking diagonal. And when it went in behind these trees, it kind of stopped for just a minute, and I heard like this crazy sneeze, and then it made a little noise and like it cleared its throat and walked off. Never paid me no bit of attention or nothing else. But
Yeah.
like I said, I'd almost forgot about that till you said something about the cough, and I remembered that. But it sounded like it sneezed, and then kind of like, when you sneeze, you clear your throat. That's what it sounded like. And that's the only two things that was there is me and it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And the cough he described, he said it reminded him of someone who had like bronchitis or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was pissing him off because he thought it was a hunter, first of all, in his area, and second of all, making a bunch of noise. So he was really irritated by it. But no, I think that they can sneeze. And I mean, I think they are susceptible to some diseases.
Yeah. DW, you got any questions? I see you in the chat there. I don't know if you ever got in or not.
He's been handling the chat for me. I had to step away for a moment.
Okay, well, give us another question.
Wes, did you see the most recent Yellowstone vid of the family stepping out into the clearing and looking right at the camera? And after a few minutes, the park rangers turned towards the camera?
I haven't yet. It's been sent to me. I haven't had a chance to review it yet, though.
Okay. That was just a member of the family wanting to know if you'd seen it and what were your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys will have me back, I'd be happy to come back and answer that question, and then I'll tell you about the brothers. Someone asked about paranormal things, and I got one that'll really blow the audience away. They may have heard it already on the show, but sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine. Somebody else wanted to know, have you had any contact with Tracy from episode 75?
Yes. Yeah, no, I talked to Tracy, not recently, but I talked to him after his encounter. And I know he was just really struggling. I know he was even seeing a counselor over his encounter, and I don't blame him. I probably would have too. But he's doing better. I know he had a run-in with some government officials. He was applying for a job. It was I don't want to go too much into it, but it was a government job. And so he got hassled a little bit about the whole encounter thing. But Tracy's a nice guy. I talked to him. Probably last time I talked to him was maybe a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago.
Oh, okay.
I'm sitting here just to talk, and I didn't realize I had my mic muted.
Wes, have you been in touch with the Border Patrol agent that was one of your past guests?
Yeah. Rocky Elmore, is that what they're referring to?
That's what I'm assuming.
I've had a couple Border Patrol agents on, but Yeah, I talked to Rocky. Is there a specific question that they're wondering?
No, I think they were just wondering, was any more to the guest story?
No, there really wasn't a whole lot more. He came out and talked about an encounter. They would run into these things. They would run into the devil dog, is what the Border Patrol agents called it down there. They don't call it Dog Man. They call it the devil dog. But there wasn't really a whole much any more to the encounter. Those guys run into weird stuff down there. I mean, paranormal stuff they've run into. Um, devil dog. Some of his paranormal stories are just it's enough to make your skin crawl. And it's just these guys out there running around, and they're pretty open about Bigfoot, Dogman, or this other weird stuff that they run into down there. I was shocked how open those guys were.
Yeah. That reminds me, West. Just looked up and seen the chat. Somebody's in the chat. There's a buddy of mine. He's actually a fish and wildlife games officer. And like 3 weeks ago, we were doing a live stream, and he called in because they caught. I can't remember fish. You have to tell Achaia if it was 2 or 3 young boys. I think around the age of 13, and they were running around in the woods by themselves, knocking on trees, hooping and hollering, trying to find a Bigfoot. And just so happened, luckily, they found fish instead. I was telling them how dangerous that could have wound up being.
Yeah, I always say it's all fun and games until you run into one.
Yeah, I thought you'd get, I didn't get to share that with you, but he's one of the guys, like I said, he calls in, tells us, like I said, we were live, and he got called out during the live show and come back to us and telling us that. And I tell people, you need to watch what your kids are doing, especially when they go in the woods, because just because you haven't seen nothing or heard nothing doesn't mean one couldn't be going through there or living there.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of people, the types of those on the show, where they go out and they're trying to have some sort of encounter. And I mean, I can think of, I've had college students on that actually did run into one, and it turned into those kids being hunted really quick, and it wasn't quite the happy encounter that I think that they were expecting. But yeah, I mean, it's like I always say, be careful what you wish for, because you might just get your wish.
Yeah, because the area they were in, I don't know if Fish wants this known or not, but I'm not going to say the area, but the area they were in is a hotbed for not just Sasquatch, but a lot of Dogman reports, and that could have turned out so bad.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But you got another one, Lakeia?
Let's see. Do you think it would be possible to tranquilize a dogman long enough to kill it, such as maybe putting a trank in livestock and using it as bait?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah.
The problem with tranquilizing an animal is there's a science to it. If you shoot it with too much, you're going to kill it anyway. If you don't hit it with enough, you're just going to piss it off. And now you have a drugged up animal that can rip you from limb to limb, and it's on a different planet because you just tried to tranquilize it. So I don't know that I would try. And that's why I know a lot of people don't like to hear killing one. But I think you're better off just pulling the trigger and killing one than tranquilizing it. I had a guy on the show one time. I'll tell you guys a story real quick. His mom and dad were contractors for, I believe it was Fish and Game. And so let's say there was an animal, like a horse that got hit, and they needed to go put it down. They would go out and put the animal down. So she knew about tranquilizing large animals. She was basically a vet. And one night they got a call, middle of the night, to come out and tranquilize this animal that this snowplow had hit. And so they go out to the place, and she said it reminded her of a large gorilla laying on the side of the road. She didn't know what it was. She thought it was dead at first. And then it started moaning and growling and just was in agonizing pain. And there was cops there. And so she went and hit it with the tranquilizer to tranquilize the animal. And so she hits it with the tranquilizer, and walks back to talk to the state trooper that was there. And she's like, "What is that thing? Is that a gorilla that got loose?" And the state trooper didn't know what it was. And he had already called in Fish and Game, Wildlife Services. He had called everyone in the world to come out there. And she said that when she turned back around, the creature was gone. So somehow it had gotten up. I take that back. I want to say she hit it twice, because the first one, she was judging the weight, and I think she said it was something like 800 or 900 pounds is what the weight she was judging. So she hit it once with the tranquilizer, and then was talking to the snowplow driver, and he was all upset. He didn't know what he had hit. He said he thought he hit a person, and didn't realize what it was. And the animal was still groaning and moaning, and so she went over and hit it again with another tranquilizer that should have most likely killed the animal, because it was too much. But the animal was in such pain. And then she goes back to talk to the state trooper, and they all three turn around. The animal's gone. And she heard it going, breaking branches, and it had jumped off the embankment and went down into the forest. So it's really hard to judge the weight of these things. And I don't know that a tranquilizer, it looks good on paper and it's a great idea. I just think in reality, even with the dog man, I just don't see it working.
Well, not just that. You don't know if the drugs are going to have the same effect on it. You know, the drugs may not even work on that particular creature. And now, like you said, you've got an animal that is kind of, basically he's on a crack high, and now he's pissed, hurt, and high.
Yeah. Which makes it even more dangerous. And I think if someone were to tranquilize a dogman or Sasquatch, I think they'd probably end up shooting it anyway. I just think they'd end up killing it anyway.
Yeah. Well, Wes, man, this has been fun. But if you would you like to come back on again?
Yeah, I'd love to come back on.